find the perfect points to buy
One of the largest surveys done with health plans.
Because many of us live on the internet, we get bombarded with data and people's interpretation of it. Then we're told that we shouldn't be spreading misinformation or that we need to do our own research. But one, how do we do that? And two, how do we even make sense of graphs? The team here at Galactic Polymath worked with a bunch of scientists who make and interpret graphs every single day. And together we came up with the PST framework, the secret to making sense of any graph. You can check out our intro video about it linked above. PST stands for Patterns, Prompts, Strange, Takeaway, and Trust. So let's talk to some scientists and see them use this framework on a graph they've never seen before. Hi scientists, do y'all want to introduce yourselves?
All right, my name is Parker Binns. I'm a master's student in Dr. Loring's lab.
Hi, I'm Molly Russell, and I'm a first semester graduate student in Dr. Loring's lab.
Hi, I'm Tom Loring. I am a assistant professor at Wichita State University.
As scientists and as people, why do you think data literacy is important?
It's very important to understand how to interpret graphs and things like that.
In this day and age, we can't really determine if what we're reading online is real or not.
I think it's part of just being a good citizen. If you are going to be a critical thinker, if you're voting, if you're doing anything really in your life, like you're going to have to be able to separate out what you want to believe is true versus what is actually true.
So making sense of data is important, but what does it look like in practice? So I'm going to show you a graph you've never seen before, and I want you to all walk us through the PST framework. Okay, so here's your graph. What patterns do we notice? Parker, let's start with you.
So first off, the first thing I noticed is like most of the peaks are very variable, and we see like a huge peak right here. Then we see the same type of peak in this area, but it's less significant.
When I'm looking at this graph, in terms of the patterns that I'm seeing, I definitely see a peak in this region right here. And you can kind of see another little peak over here. It's just definitely not as exaggerated as the one to the left. And then when you're looking at this third panel right over here, it's kind of interesting that there's no graph in this region either.
When I'm first looking at this graph, I notice a few things. One, that there are 3 different graphs on here indicated by 3 different colors. And then when you look at the second and third graph, you see this sort of early spike, and that is completely absent from the first one.
All right, awesome. I love that you all observed different patterns from this figure, and this is without even knowing what the graph is about. Okay, here's the full graph. What prompts or text are important for understanding these patterns?
So here on the x-axis, this horizontal line, we have time. So each of these different panels represents a different time period. So we have 2018, 2019, and 2020. And then those are broken down by each of our months. So that's just indicated by the first letter of each month. And then here on the y-axis, we have what look to be numeric variables, and we can see that's average flow rate in liters per second. So that's just indicating how much water is flowing through like a given system at a time.
So when I look at this graph, there's some things like I can't understand yet, and that could be what this is applying to. So we don't know if this is applying to like a stream, to something that could be more industrial.
Of course, the other thing I try to do is to think about what that actually means in terms of volume. So I'm thinking of 600 liters per second would be like 200 3-liter Coke bottles like running by you all at one time. I see that this comes from the United States Geological Service. I have no idea what this number means. And then it's from Indian Bend Wash, and a wash is a sort of intermittent system that's very flashy in the desert Southwest.
All right, so we can already see how studying the prompts helped us have a deeper understanding of the patterns that we noticed. But what stands out as being strange in this figure?
So the first thing I notice is there's long periods where it's nearly at 0. And it seems to be that the timing that these periods of 0 average flow seem to be at different points. The water only returns for a short period of time, then it usually goes back to that state where there is 0 flow. So that's a very interesting thing, and it could tell us a lot about the system we're looking at.
So what stands out to me most when looking at these different panels across time is when these peaks occur. So first we have these huge peaks right here that occur somewhere between July and November. But then that same pattern, it kind of shows itself here again in a similar range, but it's definitely not to the same extent. And then it doesn't present itself at all over here. Essentially no water available in these systems at that time.
So it seems like the framework isn't necessarily linear. Many of the strange things you pointed out seem to be exceptions of patterns, so all of these steps seem to feed into each other. So what are your takeaways?
I guess some of the takeaways I have from this are that this is a very dynamic system. And so I think there's a lot of questions that I come away with, right? If we look at this across more years, are there some patterns that are pretty consistent? What are the maximum sort of rates that we see? How variable is this from day to day? Is there something at a bigger scale that kind of predicts when we have water, when we don't? So I'm going to guess this is somewhere from the desert Southwest, maybe Arizona or somewhere.
That's a pretty rich story you've extracted from just a bunch of dots and lines. Do you trust this data in this takeaway?
Because I see that it's by USGS, and that's pretty reliable, because I don't know much about what else is going down here, but if I looked at the paper, I could verify a lot of these things that I'm thinking about. So it gives me like insight into what I would look into further.
Yeah, so based on where the data was collected from and how they presented it across all of the years and what kind of information that they included, I would trust it. I would just do a little bit more deep diving into how different things were calculated, or if they excluded some different variables or data to kind of make their graphs look pretty.
All right, thank you everyone for sharing your graph reading skills with us. That was pretty cool to see how ecologists were able to read a graph they've never seen before. The great thing about this framework is that it applies to any graph. Just remember this approach when you're confronted with new data. Ask yourself, what patterns do I see? What do the text prompts tell me? Is there anything strange, like outlier points, missing data, or weird scales of measurements? What's the takeaway? And do you trust it? Is there anything such as a questionable or unknown source that makes you doubt the takeaway? This video supports our free data streams unit for high school through college. Find the link in the description. Please like and subscribe to help support more free content like this developed with researchers.